Leaves from a Russian Diary. Pitirim Sorokin. Part 4. 1921 to 1922. Chapter 25. New Plays.
We have many reasons for being grateful to our government,
said the writer N, in one of his most ironic moods.
We have a kind of happiness here which citizens of capitalistic countries never experience. For instance, when we go to bed at night we are not sure that we shall wake up alive. Then when we do waken and find ourselves alive, what happiness! When we take our places in the queues we are never sure that we shall receive anything. After standing for an hour or more and we receive half a pound of bread, what joy! When we reflect that we have been arrested and may even be executed, we have only to congratulate ourselves that for the moment, at least, we are free. What citizen of a bourgeois country knows such happiness? Above all, our government provides us with such constant excitement that we can never feel boredom. No cheap circenses, mind you, but thrilling tragedies of real life. Arrests, prisons, executions. Not long ago we witnessed the Kronstadt tragedy. After that we had the Tagantsev conspiracy, then the trial of the social revolutionists, thrillers, all of them.
One of the greatest tragedies played before our eyes was in the winter of 1921. The government, having spent all the gold in the treasury, all the private wealth it could seize, still found itself in need of money. The next resource was the wealth of the church. Under pretext of needing money for famine relief, the government made a demand on the churches for all the treasures they possessed. The church authorities made answer that they were willing to give their wealth to feed the starving, but that they wished to distribute the food themselves, or through the American Relief Administration, which they thoroughly trusted. The government, enraged, because it wished, of course, to seize this treasure for its own purposes, invented the lie that the Russian church authorities and the Orthodox people had refused to give their gold for the relief of the starving. They then began to take by force what the church authorities would not surrender. The result was a great wave of church disorders, which swept over the whole country. When the Chekists came to a church they found crowds of believers who barred the entrances. In villages and towns everywhere riotous scenes were enacted, and many people were killed and wounded, for what could unarmed people do against machine guns and cannons? Twice the Chekist troops attacked Kazansky Cathedral and the Aleksandrovich Church in Petrograd, and twice unarmed masses drove the soldiers back. The third time they tried to do it they were mowed down by machine guns and the churches were sacked. Thousands of priests and people were arrested for this show of counter-revolution. Most of them were shot without trial, but some were given a mockery which was reported throughout the world as a trial. It was a lovely summer morning in 1922 when the trial which I shall describe opened in Petrograd. Near the building of nobility stood a vast crowd waiting, and guarding them stood regiments of Chekist soldiers. About 10 o'clock 3 trucks filled with the arrested counter-revolutionaries, and other trucks with guards and machine guns appeared. In the first truck there were the Metropolitan Benjamin and other priests, Professor Nowitzki and other fervent believers. In their worn cassocks, with heads uncovered, their long hair falling around their emaciated faces, the Metropolitan and the priests were like the Mariters of early Christian days. When the people saw them, they fell on their knees and began to sing, Kyrie eleison, and, It is worthy to glorify you, songs with which, in religion services, the bishops are met. The Metropolitan and the priests standing surrounded by armed guards, blessed the people kneeling in the streets, and the songs rose, mingled with sobs and cries. The Chekists rudely ordered the priests and believers to get down from the trucks, and crazed with the sight, some rushed towards the old Metropolitan. But the soldiers drove them back with guns, and the prisoners entered the building, greeted by shouts and hisses from the communists, who execrated them as poisoners of the people's minds.
Peace be upon you,
said the Metropolitan, blessing them. And with those words in their ears the communists opened their farce of a trial. In the streets and in the Mikhailovsky Square the crowd continued to sing religious songs. While they were singing, a man in a rich cassock approached. This was Vidensky, one of the leaders of the Bolshevist Living Church, and one of the denouncers of the Orthodox priests. Immediately the crowd became mad with rage. They shouted every insult they could think of at the man, who to them was Judas reincarnated. As he was about to enter the building, an old woman picked up a stone, and threw it with such good aim that it struck Vidensky in the face, knocking him down. The Chekists arrested the old woman and began to disperse the crowd. But the people were obstinate. They held their ground, still singing. The Chekists then opened fire, killing many and arresting all who failed to get away. The street was quiet after that. Blocked by Chekist troops, none could now enter save communists, victims, and witnesses. For 2 weeks the trial continued.
For participation in the criminal organization called the Hierarchy of the Orthodox Church.
And
for counter-revolutionary resistance to the requisition of church treasures.
The indictments read. Of the first-named crime all the prisoners were unquestionably guilty. For 1,000 years the Orthodox Church had existed in Russia, and these priests and believers were members of its criminal organization. Of the other charge they were not guilty. They neither instigated nor participated in any physical resistance. They merely insisted upon spending their treasure for starving people rather than for the benefit of the Third International. These victims all during their trial showed the strength and calmness of Christian martyrs. Their heroism, their devotion to religion and to the country, their faith in the will of God was so deep and sincere that even some of the communist judges were moved. Had not the Red God, in the persons of Zinoviev and other leaders, been thirsty for more blood, even this court would never have condemned the Metropolitan and his fellow prisoners. Said the Metropolitan in his last speech.
I and only I, as head of the Church, am responsible for the actions which you call criminal, but which I look upon as fulfillment of duty. These priests and believers are but executors of my commands, and they must be acquitted. Judge me as you will, and I shall accept your verdict. If God destines me to live longer and to do His will, I shall do it. If I am to die, blessed be the will of God.
Crossing himself devoutly, he finished.
My Lord and Saviour, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Into thy hands I commit my spirit.
Followed then 10 death sentences, absolutely prearranged, and great applause from the communist audience, this also prearranged. A few weeks later the Metropolitan Benjamin, his hair shorn and dressed in rags that he might not be recognized even by his executioners, was shot in Moscow. 5 others, including Novytsky, professor of the University of Petrograd, had already been murdered. While this tragedy was going on in Petrograd, another, which we called the Trial of the Social Revolutionists, was staged in Moscow. About 50,000 people marched through the streets carrying banners with the words, "We demand the death sentence for all social revolutionaries." In this crowd of marchers I saw many of my friends and acquaintances, many students and workmen, who did not desire the death of social revolutionaries, and who I knew hated the communists with all their hearts. Yet they marched. Why? Because they wished to live. Because they feared, nay, knew that unless they marched they would lose their employment. Some days before the demonstration the authorities announced that any Soviet employee who did not participate would be dismissed, and any citizen who refused to march would thereby proclaim himself a counter-revolutionary. In this way a demonstration of 50,000 people was easily arranged. About this time Vandervelde, Rosenfeld, and other defenders of the social revolutionaries were crossing the frontiers of Russia on their way to Moscow. At each station their train was met by rioters against themselves and the social revolutionaries. The riots were arranged in this way. The whole train to which their carriage was attached was filled with communists, and at each station they got out and with the aid of local communists staged a demonstration against the foreign visitors. The writer N. spoke truly. The Soviet government provided us with a constant series of tragedies, in the witnessing of which young people grew old, the mature grew white-haired, and many spectators died.